Welcome to On the Middle East, Al Monitor's weekly podcast on the big stories of the day. My name is Amber Zaman, and I'm a roving staff correspondent for Al Monitor based in London. Today, we'll be looking at the drama unfolding in Iran following the brutal murder by the regime's so-called morality police of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. Her death in police custody sparked nationwide protests that are continuing and posing one of the biggest challenges to Iran's clerical regime in decades. Mahsa's crime was to have revealed too much hair from under her mandatory head covering or the hijab. The regime has responded with violence, and at least 50 people have been reportedly killed since the demonstrations began more than a week ago. Many people say that the actual death toll is far higher. With us here today to discuss these developments is Asso Hassan Zadeh, an Iranian Kurdish academic and former Deputy Secretary General of the Kurdistan Democratic Party of Iran, one of the main Kurdish opposition groups in the country. Mahsa Amini was from Iranian Kurdistan, a region that has faced even greater repression from Iran's clerical regime, stemming from Kurdish demands for greater political and cultural autonomy. So welcome to our program, Asso.
Thank you, Amber, for having me.
So the protests are continuing in Iran, with the government cracking down very violently. What is the latest? What are you hearing from your own sources? Because we do have very sketchy information, given that the authorities are now trying to block the internet and social messaging apps.
Well, the latest is that despite the threats made by Iranian officials and the fact that they seem to step up in the resorting to violence against protesters, the death toll is increasing every day, especially in Kurdistan, where we have more than half of the total number of people dead in Iran. But the movement of protestation and I would say even the uprising continue even in a stronger manner. And we are absolutely in a pre-revolutionary situation. A pre-revolutionary atmosphere is dominating Iran right now.
How is this round of protests different from previous protests? Because we've seen this happen in Iran before. We saw it in 2009 when people took to the streets to protest the fraudulent election of Ahmadinejad, and then more recently in 2018 to protest the hike in fuel prices. How is this different? And is it really of a truly threatening nature to the regime? Because the regime seems to survive.
Well, what's happening right now in Iran is at the same time not new and unprecedented. Not new because, as you mentioned, we've been seeing such movements of protestation in the past few years, every 2 or 3 years, or even every month. But the peculiarity this time is that while everything started from the killing of a Kurdish woman in Tehran, and against all the restrictions imposed by the regime to the Iranian women. But this time, it seems that all social categories of the Iranian society are taking part in it. And all parts of Iran, actually, all components of the Iranian society are joining the movement. And their demands are now very general, very radical, and they are targeting the whole regime. And now we are witnessing some sort of a momentum of solidarity among all Iranians. And the protesters seem to have the upper hand in the streets. And given the international echo and the international solidarity that we have been seeing so far, the Iranians have the impression that this time they are not alone.
They're not alone, but they're leaderless. Most of the political opposition of Iran is based outside the country. And I mean, when we say political opposition, a lot of them are very divided. we have the monarchists who are based mainly in the United States and then in Paris, but we also have the Mujahideen Khalq, which is sort of this cult-like organization that for decades fought, staged terrorist attacks based out of Iraq, but are now in Albania. And then we have the Iranian Kurds, and you were for long years part of the Iranian Kurdish opposition, the Kurdistan Democratic Party of Iraq. What role do you believe the Iranian Kurds have to play? How does the fact that Mahsa Amini is, or rather was, Kurdish play in all of this? Because the Kurds have been struggling for their political and cultural rights for decades in Iran and have really not gotten very far. Do you think this can be a sort of groundbreaking moment for them?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that those forces that you just mentioned, are the most visible in the Iranian opposition, but the Iranian political spectrum, from the perspective of the opposition, is much more diverse. But actually, the Iranian opposition, unfortunately, until now, is very much divided. They are very far from the realities of the Iranian society. On the contrary, the Kurdish political parties have a certain leverage on the population. They can mobilize the population, and the fact that the killing of Mahsa or Gina Amini, she was an Iranian citizen, a woman, a Kurdish woman who was killed in Tehran. So all this constitutes a link between the whole Iranian society that for the first time in the history of Iran is showing some sort of solidarity and understanding towards Kurdish demands. And
what do you mean by that? How are they showing solidarity with Kurdish demands? What are they saying?
Well, for example, the main slogan, women, life, liberty, which is the most chanted in the Iranian cities, including in Tehran. It is a slogan that is coming from Rojava, from another part of Kurdistan. And the Iranian celebrities, the Iranian political parties, and the whole Iranian, and all protesters, actually, they are showing solidarity to the Kurds. And right now, important parts of the Iranian opposition are establishing contact with the Center of Coordination of the Iranian Kurdish political parties in order to set up a platform for unite and to put together the efforts to continue the rest of the protest and the struggle in order to lead it to an outcome that would be in the interest of all the components of the Iranian society.
Well, it's very interesting that you mentioned the slogan Jin Jian Azadi and the fact that it's been appropriated by the protesters, because it's actually a slogan, as you said, that comes from another Kurdish group, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which has been fighting the Turkish state since 1984 and which has branches in Syria and in Iran. And many would argue that, in fact, it is that particular Kurdish group that is the most effective inside Iran rather than your groups. So isn't there a bit of an irony there?
Well, the reality is that it's undeniable that the PKK is very well organized. They are visible on the ground, but it's partly due to the fact that the Iranian regime tolerates them on the borders and they have good relations with the Iranian regime. But I do not think that they have deep roots among the population. And I think that their interference in other parts of Kurdish regions causes more harm than benefit.
So, what is the actual situation inside Iranian Kurdistan at the moment? Your party and its fighters are based outside in Iraqi Kurdistan. So, what
Right.
sort of activities can you actually engage in? And have you, as a result of these protests, stepped up these activities?
Well, as for the general situation or the background, you know that the Kurds have been victim of policies of discrimination and repression since the beginning of the revolution. Kurds were the only part of Iran that boycotted the referendum that brought to power the clergy in Tehran. Then, despite the fact that there were negotiations that took place, but very soon war resumed and the regime's army implemented Khomeini's fatwa against Kurds. The Kurdish language has always been banned in schools and in the public spheres. Organizations, political organizations, but also associations are banned. Kurdistan is the only part of Iran that has always been militarized and where the political executions still take place. And as for the activities of the Kurdish political parties, it's true that with the creation of the KRG, they encounter more obstacles because of the neighborhood with Iran, and they suspended their armed resistance since the mid-90s, but they have never been cut off from the population. They continue with the fight through non-military means such as media. They have satellite TV channels and organizational activities, and the Peshmerga forces, some elements of them, for organizational purposes, have been always present inside Iran, and despite all the obstacles that we are facing, every month young Kurds cross the border to become Peshmerga. And I can mention the fact as an example of the leverage of those parties that after the missile attack on their headquarters 4 years ago, and after the death of Mahsa Amini, the population responded very positively and very actively to their call to observe a general strike.
Yes, but as you said, they've been attacking you, and in fact, they just attacked you again, and inside the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Doesn't that really pose a big challenge, the fact that you are so constrained in your activities ultimately, because you are there as guests of the Kurdistan region of Iraq, and they have made it very clear to you that you cannot organize any kind of hostile activity against the regime of Iran from their soil, because this invites retaliatory measures from Iran, as we've seen quite frequently. In fact, this year so far, Iran has been attacking the KRG itself, its facilities, it's in fact even hit Erbil. So going forward, and what can you actually do? What kind of leverage power do you have?
Well, the Iranian regime knows that the Iranian Kurdistan is truly the avant-garde of this new wave of protest, which could be crucial for the fate of the Islamic Republic. And knowing the solidarity that exists right now among Iranians with Kurds, and the leverage that the Kurdish political parties can have on the Iranian Kurdish population. Right now, they are, beside all the killings and the arrests in Kurdistan, they are at the same time targeting the bases of Peshmerga forces on the borders right now in the few past days. And until now, it's continuing. And the Iranian regime tries to divert the Iranian public opinion and
But I have to
say that.
say, I'm very skeptical when you speak about the solidarity with the Kurds, because Persian nationalism is a very potent force in Iran. And so the idea that these people would be sympathetic to the idea of granting autonomy, political autonomy to the Kurds, overnight because of what happened, it does seem a bit far-fetched. I mean, the only example you've given me is the one of them using this Kurdish slogan. What other examples do we have of, organized solidarity? I mean, are non-Kurdish Iranian protesters putting out statements in support of Kurdish rights?
Well, one of the most important problems that Kurds of Iran are facing is that their voice and the essence of their demands have not been heard until now by not only by the central government, but also by the whole Iranian society and the Iranian opposition. But I don't want to show myself too enthusiastic. But I'm just saying that something is changing right now. It's not only about slogans. People in Tehran, we have many Kurds in Tehran, and we have many regions in Iranian Kurdistan where peoples from Persian and other nationalities are living together, and they are together taking part in the demonstrations. And there are some forms of organization. Of course, many statements from Iranian political leaders inside and outside the country show that they are ready to show a greater level of understanding towards Kurdish demands. But
they actually mention the Kurds by name in their statements?
Yes, absolutely. Something has changed. For example, I can tell you in the beginning, the Kurdish woman killed was only mentioned as Mahsa under her Persian name, but we notified them that her real name is the Kurdish name Jina. So they are using the name of Jina systematically. This is well, it's symbolic, about this. And again, I think with all the invitations and the contacts that have been established towards us, I think something is changing. But it does not mean that they will a fundamental change has occurred yet about the Kurdish demands from the Iranian perspective. But right now, I think the priority of all Iranian opposition groups is temporarily to put aside their differences in order to keep this momentum of solidarity keep on.
Of course, the role of the international community is paramount. And of course, we all know that the United States, for one, is not interested in regime change anymore. And of course, we do hear some very harsh rhetoric now coming out of Washington, and they have imposed sanctions on the Iran's so-called morality police, and the Europeans are following suit. But I mean, beyond the rhetoric and the sanctions, there is also this very great, effort to try and revive the JCPOA. And at the same time, of course, there's the whole business of energy and the fact that the war in Ukraine has diminished energy supplies to Europe in particular. And of course, that makes Iran that much more important. So given all of that, what are the prospects for real Western engagement, intervention in helping keep up the momentum, as you describe it? Aren't the Iranians, be they Kurdish, Baluchi, or Azeri, ultimately pretty much on their own in this?
Well, it's absolutely not in the interest of Iranian peoples that if any regime change happens, that it shouldn't come from outside. Of course, the regime change should be done by the Iranian population and their true representatives themselves. But we cannot deny the importance of the international dimension. The international echo in the media of what's happening right now in Iran, and the reaction of politicians and from Western countries and international organizations are much better than the previous waves of protests. but it's not enough, as you said.
Well, also the danger is that they're just using that really to add pressure on Iran to be more flexible in the JCPOA talks. I mean, that sounds very cynical, but then we're living in a very cynical world.
It's true. We know that the Western world is facing an unprecedented energy crisis. This is a serious challenge for the what's coming next in Iran. But well, for the first time, we have to notice that some effective measures have been taken. The current administration in the United States is saying that they are not going to repeat the mistakes of the Obama administration. The supplying Iranians with access to internet is being made, and more sanctions. But it's not enough. We need much more effective international measures in order to protect the civilians against the Iranian regime crackdown on protesters. But we have to see. I think the tone and the rhetoric this time from the outside world has nothing to do with what we have been saying in the past. So it gives me some sort of hope. I think between military intervention and on one side and the status quo on the other side, there are many available ways for the Western world and the whole international community in order to rescue the Iranian population and to help it in its fight for freedom and democracy.
Well, thank you very much, Asso. Let's hope that you do get freedom and democracy in Iran as soon as possible. Thank you again,
my pleasure,
for joining us.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Hagedorn, and I'm the State Department correspondent at Al Monitor.
And I'm Joe Snell. I'm Al Monitor's video editor. Let's admit it, this past year has been difficult to stay on top of the news and sift through what's accurate and what's misleading. Let Al Monitor help you.
If you care about the Middle East and North Africa, you should consider listening to Al Monitor's audio series On the Middle East with Andrew Parasalidi and Amber Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspi. You can now watch our newest video podcast, Reading the Middle East with Gilles Capel. You can subscribe to these series on your favorite podcast platforms.
And through a host of free daily and weekly newsletters, we offer a range of perspectives with the highest journalistic standards. You can subscribe to these newsletters at almonitor.com.
As an award-winning media service headquartered in Washington, D.C., Al Monitor has a network of over 160 contributors around the world.
So if you haven't done so already, be sure to visit almonitor.com, where you can find all of these newsletters and podcasts along with first-class reporting and analysis.
And this brings us to the end of this week's On the Middle East. Thank you for tuning in and hope to be with you again very soon.